Welcome to the Post Shift Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC. What has happened, Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. This whole couple of months here, I'm looking at doing a sort of a look back on 2024 and then what's going to happen into the future in 2025. Obviously, I'm going to try and get as many great guests as I can possibly get. So I'm hoping it brings you a lot of value and gives you a little bit more of an outlook on 2025 from people who are right there with legislation, right there with the organizations that are changing these sort of rules. But today we've got Chris Elliot, the Economic Director for Restaurants Canada. So thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So it is important because the one thing I think there's a lot of, I did a business sort of survey recently, and some people are saying they're down 20%, some people are saying they're 30%, some people are saying they're up 20%, but their costs are up 30%. So I really want to get down to like the broad, I want to do broad brushstrokes on the industry as a whole for Canada, because obviously there's different markets. I'm in Victoria. Vancouver, Toronto, where you're based, are very big markets. There's a little bit of difference when it comes to consumer changes and making money. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster for this year. Can you give us a snapshot on how we fared this year compared to 2023?
Yeah, I think your analogy of the roller coaster is so accurate because it does feel like over the last 5 years, it has been this roller coaster ride. 2019, things were starting to build up, and then we had this big drop because of the pandemic. And then even that recovery, there was a lot of bumps along the way because we kept being the reopening, and then we're closing again, and now we're reopening again. And 2023 seemed like a year where things started to level off. And so we're kind of in that plateau phase of the roller coaster. And just when you think things have settled down, then we see another dip in 2024. So when we look at 2023, just in perspective, we saw total food service sales grow by about 14% on a year-over-year basis. So a very strong year. But the reason why I say it plateaued is because once you factor out inflation and then population growth, the average Canadian was spending the same in 2023 as they were in 2022. And then in 2024, we started to see that decline. So people were excited to get back out to restaurants in 2023, but the weight of higher cost of living, rising menu prices, a lot of economic uncertainty meant that they were pulling back on spending at restaurants. And we saw this across every segment of the food service industry.
Do you find obviously inflation and rising food costs have been something that's just been continuing to go higher and higher and higher? What trends do you see the operators managing these challenges in 2024? Are you talking one-on-one with operators, or are you definitely much more of a broad scope?
Oh, we're talking through our surveys to operators, but we see those individual results to get a sense as to how they're adapting to this situation. Over the last 2 years, we've seen double-digit increase in costs for food, for labor, for rent, for utilities. In some cases, insurance has gone up 100%, especially in the bar segment. It's just outrageous, some of the prices and cost increases that we've seen. And the challenge with restaurants is how much can you pass on to consumers? Consumers are also dealing with a lot of budgetary constraints, but at the same time, there's only so much capacity for us as an industry to absorb those costs. So we're trying to walk that fine line to how much we can pass on to consumers and how much we can absorb. The challenge is operators are raising menu prices. They don't have a choice in this case. Over the last 18 months, we've seen menu prices at quick service restaurants go up by 13%, at full services by 10%. These are big increases. And yet on the flip side, when we talk to restaurants, we know that 50% of operators are either not making any money or operating at a loss. So we're really trying to walk that fine line, but it's been a struggle because the more you raise menu prices, the less likely people are going to come to visit your restaurant, which then puts you in more of a financial crunch. So operators are really trying to figure out what's the fine balance between I can raise menu prices, but I still have to operate and make money here. That's the challenge.
Yeah, and I suppose consumer education, consumer knowledge is, you can sort of put together the food costs and you can put against alcohol costs and drink costs and that sort of thing as, oh, well, I understand that because I have to do that day to day. But when it comes to like utilities and insurance doubling, it's sort of like, well, I can't really educate my consumer on why my insurance has doubled this year, and that's why I have to add that to the ticket price of a dish.
Precisely. And so operators are trying to look for different ways to, okay, my costs have gone up, but maybe I don't do a big major price increase all at once, but maybe I do it in smaller portions throughout the year. Maybe I pick specific items where I know I'm not making money on this, so let me just raise the prices a little bit more to offset some of those higher expenses that people are having to pay.
Mm. And that sort of brings up the GST holiday that we're about to implement. Um, and it's obviously food, some alcoholic beverages. As a win for Restaurants Canada and the restaurant industry, how did that sort of come into play? How did that sort of start the conversation with the government?
This is a conversation that we've been having with the government since before my time. So,
Oh,
just to give a little bit of context here, the GST came into effect in 1991. And it was an immediate 7% sales tax on goods and services, and particularly on restaurant meals. And groceries were exempt. And so it created an incentive to not go out to restaurants as much
hmm
and go to groceries more often. Massive decline in our market share. So our market share back in 1990 was about 42%. So for every dollar spent on food in Canada, 42 cents of that dollar spent at restaurants, and the remaining 58 cents spent at groceries. And that was in line with what was happening in the US. And then with the impact of the GST, that number dropped to about 38 cents.
mm,
We have never recovered from that. And so when I first started in 1999, so about 25 years ago, a decade later, this was still our top issue as an association. We were still trying to convince government that you have to treat food fairly. You can't have no tax on one type of food and then tax another type of food.
mm,
So that was just sort of the historical context there. Coming out of the pandemic, operators were still struggling. And as I said, we had 50% of operators not making any money. The government did not extend SEBA. And so a lot of the challenges that came out of that, they were looking for ways to help our industry. And so we had put some proposals together, but they came back to us and said, well, what about a GST holiday? To which we said, this is great. This is absolutely going to be the biggest victory for the food service industry. Even if it's just a temporary fix, it comes at a time of year when people are not going out to restaurants as much. So we see this as being basically injecting $1.5 billion worth of additional spending in the food service industry that was not going to be there before.
okay.
So absolutely massive.
I've seen a little bit of grumbling, obviously, from the bar industry when it came to what the GST exemption was when it came to drinks. And I get there's a whole bunch of socioeconomic things that go into what was decided on what was going to get the GST holiday when it came to alcohol. Why was hard alcohol sort of like left out? Why was that list down to beer and wine and sake and the coolers?
Initially, I think our discussion was that it would not be included.
Mm,
And so the fact that we were able to talk to government and government understood the economic plight of the food service industry, they were able to extend it up to a certain point, but they also understood that there may be other groups out there that would be less enthusiastic
yeah.
about reduction in the tax on some of the hard alcohol.
Mm,
So I think the government was trying to walk a fine line there to appease and help help our industry, but at the same time, not set off other organizations that would object to having those being tax free as well.
yeah, I've had a couple of conversations. I'm like, I get it for our little niche of the world. Completely understand that it does seem a little bit harsh, but like in the grand scheme of the socioeconomic of the society that we're in, it can cause a lot more issues than help.
Yes, yeah. But I think when we look at it in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the amount of sales that this will help generate for the food service industry, I think it's
Mm,
such a positive win for the industry. And what we're trying to do is to have that extended.
mhm.
Originally, the discussion was, and the fear was that when there was rumblings about a GST holiday, that it would only apply to prepared meals at grocery stores, but would not apply to restaurants, which would further that gap
Yeah.
between the cost of a restaurant meal and the cost of a grocery store. So if you go in and you buy prepared chicken meals at a grocery store or prepared sushi at a grocery store and not pay tax, but that same prepared chicken and sushi at a restaurant, you pay tax. Again, that would be absolutely devastating to
Mhm.
our industry at a time when we're still struggling. So the fact that the government understood through all our lobbying efforts that this is an industry that requires a lot more support, they were able to extend it to a broad range of goods, including alcohol, which they really didn't have to. So the fact that they covered off most of the alcohol items was really, again, fantastic win for us.
Awesome. Let's change gears up a little bit. With staffing being such a hot topic, I'm sort of going on this massive staffing turnover kick right now and going into 2025. Do you see any improvement in retention and recruitment this year, or do a lot of operators still in a like a labor crisis?
Well, it wasn't as bad as it used to be. So
Mhm.
coming out of the pandemic, we had 200,000 job vacancies. Uh, People were looking for job security. So they left our industry, they went to retail because we never knew at any given time
Mm.
we could be shut down again because of the pandemic. So the fact that we've been able to bring back a lot of those jobs really over the last year or two. People miss the industry. They love working in the industry. There's the tips component, which certainly helps people and support their income, and they like the flexibility. Um, in terms of overall number of job vacancies, we're back down to basically pre-pandemic levels. So that's a positive sign. But what we've seen is operators understand that is a whole new world out there, and we have been raising wages at a faster rate than pretty much any other industry in order to attract and retain workers. So I think there's the economic incentive of raising wages to attract
Mhm.
workers, but I think more importantly, and one of the things that I've been on a kick for the last year as well, is that it's fine that you have to grow your business, but in order to do that, you need to be an employer of choice.
Mhm.
You need the right staff in place. And I've gone into restaurants where you look at the plate of food in front of you and it's like, is there $20 worth of food here or $15 worth of food? And I was at a sushi restaurant and saw the dish being prepared. And the way that everything just had its little spot and it was just prepared with such great sense of detail and attention to detail, the service, the quality of the experience. This was $20 worth of food, maybe not, but when you add in that level of care and attention to detail and the service on top of that, absolutely it was worth it.
Mhm.
So I've been trying to, again, ring that bell with operators is we're all competing and you're all restaurants are all competing with each other and bars are competing with each other for that customer, but you're also competing with each other for that employee too. And so by being that employer of choice, and I know it gets thrown around a lot and I'll explain what that is, but by being that employer of choice, you're able to attract the best staff. And so I've heard stories where an operator had a lot of staff that from different countries here in Canada, never seen snow before. And so on the one day that their restaurant was closed, he took them all out tobogganing for the first time. And so those are the types of experiences where you building a connection with employees. You know that they're not always going to stay with you the whole time, but you're helping build that experience and helping people understand like you can work together and have a good time and build those relationships outside of the workplace too. And that's something that people will remember. They're going to take it
Mhm.
with them. So I think that's one of those stories that I always remember, and that's why I relate it to others when I hear about. And whenever we talk about labor, it's an important story.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a big one for me. Like, my venue, we've had 14% turnover over the last 4 years. So we've had minimal like, I've got people with me 3 and 4 years in the hospitality industry. So it's a something that is needs to change post-pandemic, and the next generation, the Gen Zs, are the ones that are gonna be pushing for that change, I think.
For sure, and we see people go on social media when there is a bad employer, and
Mm.
it's in other sectors too, and it really does harm the business and the credibility of the business because if you have one bad experience with a customer or one bad experience with an employee, it takes so long to try and recover
Mm.
from that bad experience.
Talking about consumers, this year has been very interesting, the consumer shift, um, dining habits in 2024. As you were saying about, the GST holiday, groceries, and dining out, what is it, what are they prioritizing? Because I'm finding, just especially the Gen Z drinking section, they're definitely leaning more into non-alcoholic. Like our non-alcoholic sales are up 37%, while our liquor sales are down like 6%, which is very, very weird for a cocktail bar. What is, the prioritizing of dining out and the consumer behavior, for 2024?
It's all over the place. It's we're seeing all these different trends. So if we go back to before the pandemic, the first thing that we ask and people go out to restaurants, I want something, especially quick service. I want
Mhm.
something that's affordable, quick and easy, not expensive, and I want it fast. And now what we're seeing is price plays such a critical role now when people go out to restaurants. So it's that price sensitivity. And so what we've seen with lower income households, especially, is that they put that as the number one issue that they're looking for when they go to a restaurant. And the biggest challenge that we're seeing is price has become a barrier to entry for a lot of lower income households. They just simply cannot afford to go out to restaurants. And so part of the other surveys that we were conducting on a monthly basis found that 20% of Canadians of lower income households never went to a restaurant for dinner at any given time in July. And that's up from 15% in 2023. And then when we look at lunches, 34% never went out to a restaurant for lunch. 50% never went out to a restaurant for a snack. So pricing plays that key role for a lot of lower income households. And so they're looking for those value meals to try and get people to come back out to restaurants. So we're seeing more and more of this. There's different restaurant chains that are now offering these types of value deals where it's under $1, under $2, to try and encourage people to come back out to restaurants, because price has been a big key. The other one is value. We've seen massive increases in price over the last few years, driven by rising costs. And so what's happening is what we're charging for what's on the plate isn't always equaling the value for the money that people are spending. So they're seeing that they're spending more, but then they get that plate of food or that dish, and it's like, is there, again, that $15, $20 there? So I would say that price sensitivity and that value, they certainly go hand in hand in terms of getting people to come into a restaurant and where they're going to go. Having said all that, I am shocked that delivery is growing by as much as it is. So I think it was up 7% for quick service restaurants, up 14% for full service restaurants on a year-over-year basis. So everything else is kind of generally flat, but then you see these big increases on delivery. So people are still looking for that convenience. They're willing to pay for that convenience. But at the same time, you have that other end of the spectrum where people are not going out to restaurants as much. So because of the pricing factor.
Do you think there's a little bit of a consumer misguidance when it comes to the price dichotomy between the QSRs and full service restaurants? Used to be quite large. Like, it used to be McDonald's was a $5 burger and you'd go to a restaurant for a $15 burger. But now that gap is still is shrinking when it comes to price and value, as you were saying. But do you think that people still in their head assume QSRs are going to be cheaper than full service restaurants?
That would be the assumption, but FSRs are really understanding that they can compete with the quick service restaurant segment now because of those price increases. Somewhere in between there, you have the fast casual. So you have full service restaurants that are now trying to tap into that quick service and fast casual marketplace. An example that I've been given in the United States is Chili's restaurant. They have a $10.99 burger. And it looks great. The portion size is fantastic. So the value is there. That's competitive with some of the burgers at some of the major chains. And so a lot of the chains are getting worried that now you see these full service restaurants that are now offering food that is competing directly with us. Before, the burger wars were always between quick service restaurants. And now it's extending into fast casual. And now that's extending into full service. And then throw in convenience stores too, where you have a 7-Eleven that sells chicken and pizza and other items. There's such a broad range of options now to choose from. So it's a competitive environment for a lot of operators, but I think the consumer is the one that wins out here because now they have more selection and more options than they did before.
You were mentioning like delivery has gone through the roof. Obviously, it's a post-pandemic thing. We got so used to that. I don't think if we had the pandemic, we'd still be looking at delivery apps the way that we're looking at now. With technology playing a massive role, do you think innovations like AI, automation, and digital ordering are going to solve some big problems, or do you think they're going to sort of maybe create new problems for operators that aren't willing to adapt to them?
It's funny because it's an area that I'm following. As an economist, we always talk about productivity, and so technology is critical to that. I was listening to a podcast the one time, and it was a CEO, and I can't remember what restaurant he was from, but he was basically paraphrasing Homer Simpson. And he said, to technology, the problem and the solution to all of life's problems. And I think that's been real accurate, because when we talk with restaurant operators and said, again, as an economist, productivity, efficiency gains can be made through technology, but there's a lot of resistance to the technology side, especially on the front of house, because they feel people want that human touch when they go into a restaurant. Do you want a robot greeter and then order off a tablet? It feels impersonal. And so there is that resistance to the technology side on the front of house. Where I would say that we're seeing more gains is on the back of house side. And Chipotle is really exploring this. So they've got the avocado, which is something that will automatically peel and core the avocados, and then the staff will mash it up. But it takes the monotony out of basically peeling and coring a ton of avocados over the course of the day. So
I'm gonna look that up just so I can see how that it works.
yeah, it's really cool. And the other thing that they're playing with is it's for the takeout orders, they have a basically it's a conveyor belt. And so the food will move along. And so it'll add the rice, it'll add the beans and the lettuce, tomato, and the sauces, and it just moves along. So again, all of that's designed to help with the efficiency and improve productivity of the staff. Labor's going up, labor shortages are never going to go away. So adding technology is a huge component that restaurants can start to do. But I'd say there's still, again, that resistance side of things. But then they go online globally. China's fantastic when you
Mm,
see the technology at restaurants, and they have the robot greeters and the robots that are making bubble tea. And it's beyond the novelty factor. This is a business model that works for them, and people have learned to accept and adapt to. So I think there is that fine line. When it comes to AI, though, that's another one where it is happening. We're hearing about it through drive-throughs where you're actually talking to an AI person on the drive-through, which again, very cool. And they can pick up all the different accents. So
mm,
maybe I speak a little fast, and
yeah.
so they're able to pick all that up. And the one thing that came out of the survey that we did of Canadians is people are looking for that convenience factor, but they're also looking for order accuracy
Mm.
more so than any other factor when it comes to technology. Just get my order right at a quick service restaurant. So that plays a big role in improving the order accuracy if the AI can help improve the technology of that.
When it comes to delivery apps, how much scope do you have in sort of guiding delivery apps in the economy of the restaurants and stuff? Because obviously they blow up during the pandemic. Everybody was ordering in, everybody was ordering cocktail kits, all that sort of stuff. But now we're sort of starting to see monopolization between the big guys. How do you see that play out over the next couple of years?
I would say that there is that the bigger guys are starting to group together, but there's so many smaller ones that exist out there. So I'm in downtown Toronto, just along Yonge Street, and the amount of Asian third-party delivery companies is astounding. Like there's a
Mm.
lot of diversity there because it's a different market. And so I think there's still going to be that competitive landscape. If the fees go up too much, then people are just going to switch and substitute over to a less expensive option for the third party delivery.
Mm.
So I think it will all work itself out. It's just the fact that you have higher menu prices and then the fees and then the tip and then the delivery, all of that just makes it more expensive. So there's an incentive for everyone to try and keep prices as low as you can in order to not dissuade people from ordering in the first place.
As we were talking, it has been a roller coaster of a year for 2024. What strategies are we sort of putting in place for the little small independent operators to keep surviving?
It's a big challenge for the independents because they're the ones that have been the hardest hit through the pandemic. If we look at the overall number of independent restaurants in Canada, one way you can look at the level of independence, it's down compared to where it was in 2019. But the other way to look at it is there's been population growth at that time. So back in 2017, there was 8.6 independent restaurants in Canada per 10,000 people. Today, that number is closer to 6.7.
Mm.
So if the number today was equal to the number that it was in 2017, there'd be 5,200 additional independent restaurants in Canada. So it does, it hurts the heart of communities because people want to go to their local independent restaurant and support that. But what we're seeing is Canadians are wanting to go back out and support local restaurants. They know the struggles that have been happening in the restaurant industry. So I think the one advantage is people want to support local. The second one is they're a lot more flexible in meeting the needs of consumers, and they can build more of that one-on-one relationship with people. So I would say if you're the manager, the owner, get away from the back of house and spend more time in the front of house, building those relationships, inviting people to come back, talk about some new items on the menu. I think refreshing the menu is always helpful
Mm.
as well. And I think that that's going to be critically important going forward as well into 2025 and 2026, because what we've seen really over the last 4 or 5 years is this massive increase in population. And over the next 2 decades, we'll continue to see population growth in that movement towards a much more diverse population. And so that means what you have on the menu has to appeal to a wider range of people that you normally did.
Mm.
So if you're an Italian restaurant, do you suddenly start putting Thai food on the menu, or do you change the menu over to halal? Like, these are questions that a lot of operators are asking themselves.
When it comes to 2025, sometimes operators sort of miss the forest from the trees, because we're so like entrenched in cleaning and inventory and doing liquor runs and errands. Are there any key economic indicators that you would suggest for people to look out for if they're in the market?
I would say the one key one would be consumer confidence. It's not one that is really always in the headline, but I think as an industry, we feel it every day, consumer confidence. So the index that we watch is the Conference Board of Canada's Consumer Confidence Index, and what they do is they survey Canadians every month to find out if now is a good time to make a big ticket purchase. Are they feeling financially secure? Are they feeling secure about their jobs? So all of that gets rolled up into an index. And what we see is that consumer confidence in Canada, really in the latter part of last year and early part of this year, was at the same level as it was during the 08-09 recession.
Mm.
So even if we're not in a technical recession, to the average Canadian out there, it feels like a recession. And this is one of those sort of key takeaways from the election in the United States, is that a lot of the people in the Democratic Party were touting, look at GDP, look at the unemployment rate. And they were all positive, and as they are in Canada. But the reality was consumer confidence
Mm.
was really being beaten down. And so really they lost on the consumer confidence side. And so we see that that's almost a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of what's happening here in Canada too. It's a big challenge. So as we start to see, and this is the good news, is as we see inflation start to settle down, we start to see interest rates settle down, that we'll start to see a steady increase in consumer confidence going forward. But it's just going to take time to get there.
And on the website, Restaurants Canada website, you've got the economics notebook, right? Notebook? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, the Economist Notebook.
Yeah, so yeah, the operators out there, please do yourself a favor, spend your Monday morning, read something that Chris and the team have written, because there's a lot of great information there. Because sometimes I think, like I said, forest for the trees. A lot of the times, like, what am I doing wrong? And you're like, okay, well, and you don't speak to other operators. You sort of just wonder if you're screwing up. So go to the Restaurants Canada website and check it out, because it is a fantastic resource that I feel personally, talking to a lot of operators, don't really use as much as they should.
It's all there, and I think it does give them a sense as to not only where we are today in benchmark, but also where to look in the future.
Mm.
And so we've just launched our 2024 food service facts, where we're highlighting some of the things that operators can look at, such as loyalty programs, use of technology, as well as that changing in the demographics of Canada, and that twist towards a more diverse population. And what does that mean for operators? And how
Mm.
can they adapt to these changing situations? So it's all there for them.
Yeah, because I think a lot of them are scratching their heads about Gen Z. I'm trying to give them a little bit of love and try and tell them how to will for staff as well as consumers. You guys advocate tons for standalone operators and big operations as well. What policy wins and setbacks did you have in 2024?
I would say one of the biggest setbacks was the population one.
Mm.
So with the federal government's announcement that they're limiting the number of temporary foreign workers in Canada, as well as putting a cap on the number of permanent residents and actually lowering that cap from where it was, it creates a two-pronged problem for our industry, because we do rely on temporary workers to fill a lot of gaps, especially in remote communities.
Mm.
So there's the labor component. My side would be more on the demand side, where if we start to see the population stall, that population growth stall, it impacts overall food service sales. So if we go back to last year, if we had not seen the population growth that we had seen, we would have been in a recession.
Mm.
So the fact that we had that population really helped support a lot of consumption across all broad categories, which helped really the economy avoid a recession, because we were this close to falling into one. So the fact that we have fewer Canadians coming into Canada, or that plateaus, that means fewer people that want to go out to restaurants. So it does have that two-pronged effect of affecting the labor side, but also restraining a lot of the sales growth that we've had over the last couple of years, and that won't happen going forward.
When it comes to temporary foreign workers, you brought it up. I know legislation's still sort of making its way through. personally, I worked in Singapore in 2019, and they did a very similar style of legislation in Singapore a couple of years before I was there, and it was very much more across the board. Singapore's investing a whole lot of money into their own communities and their own people in a way of university and growth, and they sort of really pulled back on having any other foreign workers come in, whether it be from Europe or from even Malaysia, which is their next door country. And they did a big broad stroke across all industries, and it really did hurt the hospitality industry because you had to have, I think it was four Singaporeans for every one foreign worker, which is really tough because the culture in Singapore doesn't really allow for, well, doesn't necessarily societally agree with people in the hospitality industry being Singaporean. Like Singaporeans want bankers and lawyers and parents. So do you think that the temporary foreign worker thing in Canada is sort of similar in that way, that they're sort of putting a big brush across all industries without really like picking off the industries that may need temporary foreign workers more so?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it seemed you could make the argument that yes, it was running too hot because the housing market just wasn't
Mhm.
there to support all the people that we were bringing into Canada. So you do need the housing component. So to moderate in terms of the population growth, yes. To turn it off entirely, I think does is a bit short-sighted just because there are industries, not just ours, but other industries that do rely on that,
Mm.
that worker base in order to grow the business and really support Canadians. To support the doctors and all the other people that they have coming into Canada, you still need a service industry to support that too. And Conference Board of Canada said that over the next 7 years, we need 200,000 additional people to work in the food service industry. And where is that going to come from in order to support that growth?
Mm.
So I think the government, and we'll continue to have conversations with government just to explain to them what the consequences of that are and what it would have as an impact on communities across the country.
So we want to talk about 2025. What's your outlook for 2025? Have you got some hard and fast figures and sort of outlooks that you can share with us?
I do. So we're still doing our forecast. We had a forecast last quarter in our quarterly report. And essentially, we were saying that per capita spending in 2025 was going to be essentially the same as it was in 2024. Not a lot of movement because even though the economy is expected to be better, at the same time, we're not seeing the big gains in disposable income. So,
Mm.
sort of have these offsetting forces. The challenge for operators then is if the pie isn't growing, then the only way to really grow your business is to steal market share away from others. And in that case, I think it all comes down to value. Can you find something on your menu to provide value to entice guests to come in? Or can you add some sort of a loyalty program to encourage those repeat customers to come in as well? So I would say in the short term, as we are still continuing to deal with this confidence index issue, 2026, bit of a rough year as well. And then 2027 will probably be out of that. So people's confidence will be back up. People will be back to spending what they would normally spend at restaurants. I don't know if it'll ever get back to 2019 levels, so that pre-pandemic levels, because habits have changed so much. People working remotely, so people are just not going out as much as they used to. But I would say in the next year or so, I think it's still going to be a bit of a struggle just because of the economic conditions that we're currently in.
Yeah, I think again goes back to operators, and we're looking at what our per head spend is, what our cover count is, that sort of stuff. Your view as economists definitely broadens out to like value, consumer behavior, consumer confidence, which I think is something we never think about as operators. We never think that, oh, let's look at the consumer confidence index and see how we're all faring.
Yeah. Otherwise, you'll end up with the situation that happened in the United States, where if you ignore the consumer confidence component,
Mm.
it's to your detriment because it's such a critical component to what we're seeing. And the reason why is if you look at consumer confidence, and it's been weak. So as a result, Canadians are saving about 8% of their disposable income. So for every dollar that they have in disposable income, they're saving
Wow.
8 cents. It used to be zero point 0.5 cents. In the US, it's closer to about 2 cents of every dollar. So Canadians are really holding on because they just don't feel secure about their financial situation, their job situation to go out and spend. So
Mm.
until there is some reason and incentive for them to go out and feel I can go out and I know I can be secure, it's going to take time to get back to that.
I mentioned this a lot during the pandemic, about the government not really understanding the size and scope of how big our industry is in comparison to a lot of, and I'm gonna do this abbreviated, real job industries like oil and gas and so on and so forth. Do you think the government's starting to make and understand that we are a massive industry, that while we do have high turnover and we don't really have those figures of like how many people actually work in our industry, because there's people who work 1 or 2 days a week or are in university. Do you think the government's starting to understand that we are a massive part of the economy in Canada as by scale?
I think they got the point. This is the GST holiday is them saying, we hear you.
Yeah.
And so we have been, again, I was talking with our executive vice president on government relations who's up in Ottawa. He said they had like 70 meetings in the last year or so with different MPs. And I'm probably underplaying that because we have other people that are having meetings
Mhm.
too. But they the numbers that we go in with like are almost $120 billion worth in sales. We employ nearly 1.2 million Canadians. We're the number one source of first-time jobs. And people rely on us for entertainment, to connect with friends and family. So if you took all that away, it really has an impact on the overall economy and the spin-off jobs that we create. But on just on people's day-to-day experiences.
Mm.
They like to go out to restaurants. They don't want to have to cook all the time. So if there was no restaurant industry, how would that change society and how would that change the economy?
If there's anything, one thing you want to say to operators for the foreseeable future this next year, what's the one piece of advice you're going to give them?
I would say continue to listen to your customers. They know as much as we know best about the economy, and they know businesses know best about their business. I think understanding consumer trends is really critically important. So I'll give you an example. As I talked about, this big shift towards a much more visible minority population. So A&W was listening to their customers as well as their employees. So one of the things that customers and employees were doing, this was sort of behind the scenes, at an A&W, there was a bit of a hack that people that were South Asian didn't want a burger because of the meat, so they wanted a plant-based option. And so they were using fried potato uh, as an option and just putting that in the burger and then using the spiciest sauce available. And so that was sort of like that hash brown in a burger and spicy sauce. And now they've brought that out and rolled it out across some of their
Wow.
restaurants because they're listening to customers. They understand that that customer is changing. They want more than just a meat burger. They want vegetarian options, or they want something that's like the South Asian flavors. So
Mhm.
I thought that was a really great way that rather than just ignoring the guest, they're saying, you know what, this is actually our employees may be onto something and our guests are maybe onto something. So let's roll this out. I think it was like the piri piri burger, but it's the plant-based option, but it's with the hash brown instead of a meat burger.
That's very cool. Um, so we've had a pretty heavy chat today about the economy and scale of the restaurant industry. At the end of every podcast, I ask 5 deep dive questions about you personally, basically. What is your one life lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in life?
Oh, wow, good question. So I'm trying to think of all the different options here, but I think the most recent one would be yourself.
Mm,
I think it's all about that. And I know the word authenticity gets pushed around all the time, but I think there's something legitimate to that. And so my biggest fear, I will be honest, is doing presentations.
mm,
And so as part of this job, you have to do presentations all the time. And so like, how do I embrace this? And so my other hobby outside of doing, economics and numbers is I'm a big heavy metal fan. And I see these people get up on stage. And yeah, there's a little bit of fear involved there, but at the same time, they've been able to overcome that. So I've tried to embrace some of that heavy metal component in my presentations. And so I come out to heavy metal music, or I make reference to a heavy metal song in my presentation. And I think people sort of like, okay, this is not just a stuffy economist, that this person is actually has a bit of a cool edge to him as well. So I would say be authentic and try and find what makes you unique as well. Because one of the things I've been able to separate myself from other economists is by saying I'm the only economist in the world that encourages stage diving and crowd surfing during an economics presentation. So people remember that. And so how do you as an operator become memorable for doing something different and unique?
That's awesome.
while being authentic.
If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
Oh, there's a quote that I'm trying to think of, and it's escapes me at this present moment. And but I'll use the one that's now above my desk. So we've been through a lot, and so one of the things that I have taped above my computer is relax, nothing is under control. And sometimes, and I think with all the stress that we've gone on, is that we're trying to control so much. And the reason why this always resonated with me is because I was reading a book and it was talking almost like my personality, that you always try to control things. And I'm like, absolutely. And then the next line was, but you never had control to begin with. And sometimes we have to accept that sometimes we can't control everything. So it's mostly focusing on the things that we can control.
Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you had understood earlier in life?
Presentations are not that scary. It's, that's something I wish I had known earlier. I think it's, again, that it really ties into the relax. Not, I try to control presentations and try to be scripted about everything, versus then letting go and just enjoying the moment and enjoying the experience of it. I think that's one thing that I've learned the most out of that.
How do you define success, and has your definition of changed over time?
Success, I think, has been the same for me. It's not like, it's not monetary success. I think it's what you leave behind. It's that what we leave behind for the next generation. So it's not measured in any particular way for me. It's how do I encourage others that are going into this field, or that want to learn? How do I leave that legacy so that they can learn from that? Some of the best professors I learned from weren't the ones that were the most spectacular and most active on social media, but they were the ones that made a big difference on my life. And so that's really what I've looked up to, are those professors that have made a difference in the other people's lives, encouraging people, but they don't do it with a lot of flair. They just be themselves.
What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
Um, Leave it in a better place than what I found it. So there's been obviously a lot of changes that have happened in the industry. And so it's just continuing to, we've gone through a lot of challenges, and I'm not done yet with trying to fix a lot of the challenges that have happened in the industry. So to try and find ways to help operators understand the world a lot better through data has continued to be my number one objective in life. And I'm hoping that by the time I retire, people will have a better sense of how numbers and data can be used to help benefit their business and benefit their customers.
Chris, thank you so much for your time, man. This was a fantastic chat. The Economist Notebook on the Restaurants Canada website, when do you usually drop new information on
It's
that?
updated every 2 weeks.
Okay.
But I would say keep an eye on the coming weeks, just because of the HST holiday or GST holiday. We'll continue to be tracking what the impact of that is on the business and the industry.
Nice. And they can sign up, subscribe as well, so that they can get that straight in their inbox as well, yeah?
Yeah, I would certainly encourage them to sign up for the RC Insider, which is our biweekly newsletter, because it gives them all the different tips and information of what's happening, not just in terms of data, but on the policy side too. Sustainability and other issues are changing all the time, so it's important to keep up to date with some of the latest trends in Canada.
Yeah, and operators, if you're listening to this, which I hope you do, please just take half an hour out of your Monday morning to read some of these reports and look at some of these figures, because you're not alone. Google is free, and you can find a ton of information out there that you can, if you've had a bad weekend, you can sort yourself out.
That sounds great.
So thank you so much, Chris. Again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you. And I'll see you in 2025.
That sounds great. Thank you so
Thanks
much.
a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening, Pose Shifters. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up, and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.